UFC 314 is just a couple days away, and in this video I want to ask all the burning red hot questions about the fights and the fighters on the main card this weekend. There's a lot of unknowns about a lot of these fighters. We have Patricio Pitbull making his debut. We have Diego Lopes in his first championship fight. We have Paddy Pimblett, who a lot of people look at as a fraud. There's a lot of what ifs in this weekend's fight, especially on the main card specifically. And I want to go through these fights and fighter by fighter, starting with the main card opener, Nikita Krylov versus Dominick Reyes, and ending with that main event, Diego Lopes versus Volkanovski, and ask all the important questions and give my opinion on some of the answers to these questions. So let's get right into it, starting off with Nikita Krylov. The questions I think to ask about Nikita Krylov is, will the 2-year layoff cause some ring rust? Nikita Krylov, I believe, is on a 3-fight win streak, right? However, he has not fought since March of 2023. Now, why he's been out of the cage, some stuff happening on the other side of the world, we'll leave it at that, but he has been inactive for 2 years, and we've seen fighters come back after a 2-year, 3-year layoffs like it's nothing and look perfectly fine. And we've also seen the other side where they take a layoff and they come back and they look like a shell of their former self. Nikita Krylov is 33 years old, so he's still, as a light heavyweight, in what I would say is his prime. So I don't know. Nikita Krylov has never really been the most active fighter. He seems to take a lot of time in between his fights, so I don't think it'll play too much of a factor. He is coming back to face Dominick Reyes, and Reyes recently has come back and put himself back in the win column. He's doing his thing. He's got a couple wins against Anthony Smith and Dustin Jacoby. So I'm really interested to see how Nikita Krylov looks after a 2-year layoff, because on his 3-fight win streak, he's looked pretty impressive. And another question I want to ask when it comes to Nikita Krylov is, can he impose his grappling on Dominick Reyes? We all know Dominick Reyes is a stand-up fighter, but what happens if Nikita Krylov gets it to the mat? Because Nikita Krylov probably has the best jiu-jitsu in the light heavyweight division, and we've never really seen Dominick Reyes face any adversity when it comes to the grappling or the jiu-jitsu department. So I'm really interested to see if Nikita Krylov can get it to the ground. If he can impose his grappling on Dominick Reyes, will he be able to submit him? Because let's be real, Dominick Reyes is a solid wrestler, but in terms of the ground game, I don't think he has much of a ground game. He's a striker, and yeah, man, I don't think it's a question of if Nikita Krylov can have success with jiu-jitsu. I think it's a question of if he can get the fight to the ground. Is that his goal, or is he okay with striking with Dominick Reyes, which can prove some problems, even though I wouldn't say it's a prime Dominick Reyes. But nonetheless, I'm excited to see Nikita Krylov return this weekend. And yeah, man, it's been a long time coming, and he's going to be the main card opener. Let's get to Dominick Reyes. The question I want to ask about Dominick, I'm not really sold on Dominick Reyes' so to speak comeback. His 2 wins against Dustin Jacoby and Anthony Smith are what I would say is on the very lower side of competition at light heavyweight. He hasn't really fought anyone that's like super dangerous. I know that Dustin Jacoby knocked out Vitor Petrino out cold, but do we really know if Dominick Reyes' chin has truly recovered? Dominick Reyes got brutally knocked out 3 times in a row against Jan Blachowicz, Yuri Prohaska, and Ryan Spann. And we still, in my opinion, don't know if his chin is recovered, because Anthony Smith is not a knockout artist, right? And he was pretty much able to get Anthony Smith out of there without any trouble. And then you have Dustin Jacoby, who has power, but I don't think he landed anything significant on Dominick Reyes in that fight. So we don't know if Dominick Reyes' chin has truly recovered. What if Nikita Krylov comes out there, puts one bomb on Dominick Reyes' chin, and bam, the fight's over? And we're like, man, Dominick Reyes' chin never really recovered, he just wasn't hit with a good shot to show that it's truly that bad. So I don't know. It's still worrying looking back at like the Ryan Spann fight. Ryan Spann didn't even connect all that clean, and Dominick Reyes went out cold. I understand Ryan Spann has some good power, but man, that was a brutal KO for what didn't seem like that hard of a shot. And another question is, does Dominick Reyes have elite skills in 2025? In 2020, before he faced Jon Jones, he was the undefeated up-and-coming prospect. He was the guy who was going to come and take everything from Jon Jones, and he arguably did. He should have won that fight, but he didn't. And ever since then, or after that, it went very downhill for Dominick Reyes. And he's 35 years old now. He's not a spring chicken anymore. At 35, can Dominick Reyes compete with the elite of the elite? If he gets past Nikita Krylov, it's safe to say that, hey, man, especially if he does it in like emphatic and impressive fashion. Dominick Reyes makes a comeback and he smokes Nikita Krylov. Who's to say this guy can't go on a second title run? Can you imagine the storyline? Dominick Reyes coming back and fighting for the title a second time after like everybody said he should retire. That would be a crazy story. But nonetheless, I am excited to see these questions answered in this weekend's main card opener, Dominick Reyes versus Nikita Krylov. And we move on to the next second fight on the main card, where we have Bryce Mitchell. Now, I've noticed Bryce Mitchell in the build-up to the John Silva fight. He seems like very angry and like very emotional. And I'm wondering if that's going to play a factor in the fight. You know, at the last press conference, John Silva kind of went over the top. You know, he was roasting Bryce for being a flat earther and saying Bryce, he's going to show him the Lord and like all this stuff. And Bryce Mitchell at the press conference, the pre-fight press conference, looked noticeably pissed off. And I'm wondering if he's going to carry that into the octagon, because as we've seen a bunch of times, fighters that typically fight like angry or upset, they don't fight the best. Let's keep it real, you know? Fighters who are calculated and are like well thought out before the fights, they are the ones that fight, or the cool-headed and calm and collected, as they call them. They fight the best. Is Bryce Mitchell going to go into this fight with a chip on his shoulder? Is it personal for him? Because he's went out in the media and said that John Silva's treated him like crap and that he's just not been very nice to him and that he's going to give him a personal ass whooping and all this stuff, which is great, but I just wonder, like, is Bryce Mitchell's head in this fight? Ever since his Ark Insanity podcast, episode 1, where the UFC kind of blew up on him and pretty much said that he's a dummy, and Dana White pretty much admitted at a power slap press conference that he wants Bryce Mitchell to get knocked out. Ever since that happened, Bryce Mitchell seems to be a bit on edge. He had the podcast episode with Rampage where they kind of just bullied him and didn't let him talk. And that's another question I want to ask about Bryce Mitchell. Is the pressure going to be too much for him due to what he said on his podcast? You know, there's a lot of weight on Bryce Mitchell's shoulders after what he said on Ark Insanity about the guy with the mustache from Germany. You know, after he said all that, you know, I not so much that he regrets saying it, but like, is it weighing on his shoulders that like the UFC wants him to lose and like is preying on his downfall, and Dana White doesn't like him, and he's emotional fighting the guy who's antagonizing him? You know, is all this going to come into play when Bryce Mitchell fights on Saturday? Because when you just look at his raw skills, he poses a pretty good threat to John Silva, in my opinion. He has underrated kicking game. He has amazing grappling, you know. He has some decent striking. Go back and watch his Taporia fight. He held his own in the striking and had some solid head movement. So I'm just interested to see how Bryce Mitchell looks this weekend with all the like antics and like noise surrounding him around this fight. It's his first fight ever since his whole incident with the podcast. So I'm very interested to see how he looks. And I'm interested to see how the man he's going to be fighting looks. John Silva. This is his first ranked opponent in his entire UFC career. John Silva is 4-0 in the UFC, and he's pretty much steamrolled through his competition relatively easy. The only guy to take him down in the UFC is Charles Jourdain, and I'm interested to see if John Silva gets taken down against Bryce Mitchell, how will he handle it? How is his grappling? Will he just get submitted? Because Bryce Mitchell's submission game is no joke, man. He has high-level jiu-jitsu. You don't get a twister submission in the UFC without having high-level jiu-jitsu. So my question is, if John Silva gets taken down by Bryce Mitchell, is he going to instantly get submitted, or can he find his way back to the feet? I personally think if he gets taken down, he will be able to get up to the feet, and he won't just be like a fish out of water. I think fighters these days are very well-rounded, and I'd be very shocked if John Silva just got taken down and steamrolled by Bryce Mitchell on the ground. But another question is to be asked. I'm a casual, guys, and I'm not even sure if John Silva has fought to the third round in his UFC career. I think he's finished every opponent, so I don't think he's went the distance. If needed, does John Silva have the cardio to fight to the distance? You know, he does a lot of antics in his fight, does a lot of showboating. Is that going to play a factor in his cardio leading into the latter rounds? I'm not sure, to be honest. John Silva, you know, he's a showman. He likes to put his hands up in the air and he likes to say, "What's up?" And the next thing you know, he's knocking you out. But what happens whenever John Silva doesn't get the knockout, you know? Can he just put a beating on Bryce Mitchell for 3 rounds and win a dominant decision? Or can he hang in there and show some heart if he does, you know, gas out? So I'm interested to see if John Silva is that next level. I think he is. I do think he's going to take home the win this weekend. But all these questions will be answered. And in the feature fight, this is the biggest one for me. Patricio Pitbull. He's kind of the biggest question mark on this entire card. Now, there's 2 things that plays a factor in Patricio Pitbull's like debut: his age and his miles on his UFC or on his MMA career. You know, Pitbull is 37 years old. and he's never fought the elite of the elite. You know, he's fought in Bellator, and I think he's fought in PFL, which are solid organizations, but let's be real, they're the B leagues, the tomato leagues when it comes to competition like the UFC. Let's keep it a buck. And in his MMA career, Pitbull has had 43 fights. That's a lot of miles, man, for a guy who's 37, who's 1-2 in his last 3, who has been KO'd before. A lot of miles. How will he look at 37 years old at featherweight? You know what I'm saying? Like, there is a such thing as a 35-year-old curse, but it typically applies in championship fights. I'm not sure of the stats on 35-year-old plus fighters winning like rank fights in the featherweight division, but we all know fighters after the age of 35 tend to take a pretty big downfall in the lower weight classes. And Pitbull being 37 with 43 fights, I just don't know if he can hold up against Yair Rodriguez. I don't necessarily think it's like a skills thing, because he has legit skills. He's a great mixed martial artist. He has amazing jiu-jitsu. He has dangerous striking, but sometimes that just doesn't matter when you're faced up with the biggest boogeyman, which is Father Time. Father Time is undefeated, as we know, and this guy has a ton of miles. He's 36-7. Like I said, 43 professional fights. That's a lot of fights. I think that's more fights than anybody on this entire card by far. And for me, it's like, if Patricio Pitbull, maybe his gas tank is not going to be the same, you know? Maybe his chin isn't going to be the same. Yair's a dangerous striker, man, and he's never... I don't think Pitbull in his entire career has faced a striker as good and as dynamic as Yair Rodriguez. And how will he handle that at his ripe age of nearly 38, 1-2 in his last 3, 43 fights under his belt? I honestly think that Yair is going to defeat Patricio Pitbull this weekend. Nonetheless, I am excited to see his skills tested against the best of the best in the UFC. So, yeah, all these questions about Pitbull will be answered in that feature fight. And speaking of the main card, co-main event, Paddy Pimblett, Paddy the Baddy. And, you know, the narrative around Paddy Pimblett pretty much his entire UFC career, which it is somewhat deserved, being that the way he's fought up in his UFC career has kind of just been a bunch of old heads. But is Paddy just a hype job, you know? You look back at the Jared Gordon fight a couple years ago. Paddy Pimblett, arguably, or not arguably, pretty much lost that Jared Gordon fight 30-27. Got dominated in that fight and was gifted a decision, which is insane to me. Nearly everybody thought he lost that fight. He was delusional enough to thought he won that fight. And, you know, since then, he's kind of redeemed himself. He beat old man Tony Ferguson, you know, he submitted old man Bobby Green, but the narrative around Paddy is that he's just a hype job. He doesn't have legit skills, and whenever he faces his first real test in Michael Chandler, he's going to fold and get knocked out. That's pretty much the narrative around Paddy Pimblett. I don't agree with that. I just don't see it. I think another question that's going to be answered in this co-main event is how good is Paddy Pimblett's grappling, you know? We've seen against Bobby Green, who pretty much threw himself into a submission, that if you go to the ground with Paddy Pimblett, it is ill-advised, and he can submit you 100%. And let me just say, if Dustin Poirier can submit Michael Chandler, Paddy Pimblett can submit Michael Chandler. People were bringing up the notion, dude, Oliveira couldn't submit Michael Chandler. You think Paddy Pimblett's going to submit him? Oliveira wasn't really trying to submit Michael Chandler if you really watch the fights. He was just kind of on his back, trying to beat him up, trying to control and just win rounds. He wasn't really like chasing rear naked chokes or submissions very hard. I think that if this fight ends up on the ground, we're going to see that Paddy Pimblett has some legit jiu-jitsu, and we're really going to see how good his grappling is. Or Michael Chandler will just shuck him off and make him look silly. I don't know. I am convinced that his grappling is really good. But yeah, we're going to see if Paddy Pimblett is just all hype. Can the Scouser prove that they actually don't get knocked out? Or is he going to get cracked on that chinny chin that he seems to leave up in the air? That's kind of the notion that people have about Paddy Pimblett. His grappling's overrated. He's overrated in that he leaves his chin straight up in the air. And when you face a powerful puncher like Michael Chandler, that chin will get hit and cracked, and Paddy Pimblett will go out. That's kind of the narrative, and we're going to see if that narrative is true whenever he fights this weekend, man, and I cannot wait to see it. I am picking Paddy Pimblett to beat Michael Chandler, but I think this is really going to show where his level is in the UFC. And next up in the co-main event, Diego Lopes. There's just really one question about Diego Lopes. There's a lot of unknown about Diego Lopes. You know, he only has 6 fights in the UFC. He made his UFC debut, I believe, in 2023 on short notice against Movsar Evloev, and he lost a very close decision where Movsar just kind of grinded him out and kind of like just held him down in the grappling, and lost a close decision where he attacked submissions. You know, he had his moments, but he lost. But ever since then, he's went 5-0. He's KO'd guys like Pat Sabatini. He's KO'd guys like Sadiq Youssef. He's knocked out Brian Ortega and woke him up in the same combination. Diego Lopes has proven that he's a very dangerous and capable fighter. He's definitely not as technical as Volkanovski, but I think the most important thing, the biggest question around Diego Lopes is, does he have championship cardio? There's a narrative going into this fight that Diego Lopes's cardio is suspect when you look at the Dan Ige fight. But a lot of people aren't looking at the fact that in that Dan Ige fight in the lead up, it was at 165 pounds, I believe, and he cut weight like 2 or 3 times that week, which cutting all that weight definitely will have an effect on your cardio. Diego Lopes has come out and said that he does not think his cardio would be a factor at all when facing Volkanovski, and that he does have championship cardio. But I think that's really the biggest question about Diego Lopes. Does he have championship cardio? And is he a championship level fighter? You know, he's going from fighting Brian Ortega to Volkanovski. And in terms of skill, that's a huge skill gap. And we're really going to find out what Diego Lopes is all about this weekend, because if Volkanovski's chin hold up, I think that Diego Lopes is in a world of trouble, and it's going to be very hard for him to out-skill and out-technique Volkanovski. He's going to have to catch Volkanovski. I don't think skill for skill, Diego Lopes can like tit for tat and like out-technique Volkanovski. He's definitely going to have to catch him in like a submission or a knockout. I don't see him submitting Volk. So I do think that Diego Lopes' only way to win this weekend is to knock out Volkanovski. I do not think he's going to be able to cruise over a 5-round decision and beat Volkanovski. I just don't see it. So yeah, man, we are going to find out if Diego Lopes has championship cardio and if he is a championship level fighter this weekend, and I cannot wait. And the man of the hour, the man on the marquee, the biggest name on the card, Alexander Volkanovski. The biggest question in this fight is, can he break the 35 curse? If you guys don't know, there is a stat about guys over the age of 35 in weight classes 155 and below. They are a combined 0-17 in title fights, and people are saying that Volkanovski is going to fall victim into that statistic, and I am one of those people. I do think that Volkanovski will fall victim to the 35 curse. Volkanovski's 36 and a half years old. You know, he's past 35. He's been out an entire year. So how will the time off play a factor, and how will his chin look? Volkanovski has been knocked down twice by Max Holloway. He has been knocked down by Chad Mendez back in the day. He's been KO'd by Islam via head kick. He's been KO'd by Topuria via right hook. It's like, and he's been out of the cage for a year, and he's 36 years old, man. I genuinely think that Volkanovski is up against all odds, and if he's able to pull it off this weekend, I will be extremely impressed. If there is a fighter that can break the 35 curse, it 100% is Alexander Volkanovski. You know, he has the skill, he has the technique. I think across the board, he is the more skilled mixed martial artist over Diego Lopes, but there's so much up against Volk. I cannot pick Volkanovski. He's 36. He's past the 35. His chin has never really been the best. He's always been a chinny guy, and now he's coming off of back-to-back KO losses, and he's been out of the cage for 13 months, which I think is the longest layoff of his UFC career. So all these questions will be answered. I mean, we're going to see pretty much right away if Diego Lopes is able to land a good shot on Volkanovski's chin, how well will he handle it? Also, will Volkanovski's speed still be in there? You know, Volkanovski's always been a guy that's been faster than all of his opponents. But, you know, after being out a year and like 1 month, 13 months out, is his speed at 36 years old still going to look like it always did? That's kind of the thing Volkanovski had over his opponents. He could out-technique him and he could outspeed him because he was always faster and could always beat him to the punch. But what if he's just a slight bit slower and Diego Lopes is able to hit him on that chin? Listen, I think if Diego Lopes cracks Volkanovski clean, he will go down and he will go out cold. That's my opinion. So yeah, I'm excited to see the fights this weekend, guys. This is the best card of the year so far, in my opinion. And I wanted to ask all the important questions, and I cannot wait to see these questions answered this weekend. Drop a comment. Let me know what you guys think. What do you guys what do you guys think Volkanovski's going to show up like this weekend? Do you think he will show up in prime form, or will his chin look worse than it ever has, and will Diego Lopes crack him and put him out cold? Let me know in the comments. Drop a like on the video if you enjoyed it. Subscribe to the channel if you're new. I'm out, guys. Peace.